We've all heard it. Maybe we've even said it ourselves. It's just a game. It's harmless. It's a harmless hobby. Let the kid unwind. Yeah, I used to say those things too. I told myself that the hours I spent glued to a screen were no different than getting lost in a book or a movie. That was just my way of decompressing. But while I was busy defending my hobby, I had no clue what was actually happening inside my brain. And I didn't even realize that every time I logged on, every time I chased that next level or that epic win, I was actually the lead subject in a massive, uncontrolled experiment. And so the reality is, my brain wasn't just playing, it was being systematically rewired. This isn't a scare tactic or an exaggeration. It's actually the neurological reality that the multi-billion-dollar gaming industry might not want you to know, and that many of us just don't want to admit. For some of us, gaming can be just as powerful and, in some cases, just as damaging as a drug. And so, to understand why gaming can be so powerful, you have to understand one crucial chemical in your brain. That's dopamine. A lot of people call it the pleasure molecule, but it's not really quite right. Think of it as the motivation molecule. It's the chemical that tells your brain, hey, hello, pay attention, this is important, do that again. Our brains are wired to release a little bit of dopamine when we do something that's good for us, like eating a great meal, exercising, hitting a goal. It's what motivates us to repeat those healthy behaviors. Now let's bring in the modern video game. Okay, and I'm a gamer myself, but you got to look at both sides of the coin here. You always have to look at the pros and the cons, the positives and the negatives. And so a video game isn't a moderate, healthy stimulus. It's a perfectly engineered dopamine delivery system. Think of it like a digital slot machine. The flashing lights, the sound effects, the surprise rewards, the near misses, the sound of a nice, wonderful trophy or achievement. Every single element is designed to keep your dopamine system firing like crazy. And studies show that video games can cause a significant release of dopamine, activating the same reward pathways in the brain that are involved in other highly motivating experiences. And scientists can literally watch this happen using fMRI scans. They've seen that the brains of people playing video games light up in the exact same areas as the brains of people using addictive substances, specifically the brain's core hub for pleasure and motivation, which is the mesolimbic dopamine reward loop. That goes into overdrive. And so this isn't an opinion, it is a visible, measurable biological event. This isn't just a feeling of being hooked, it's literally your brain's reward circuit being hijacked. But here's where the problem really kicks in. Your brain is a master of adaptation. If it's constantly flooded with unnatural levels of dopamine from gaming, it does what any smart system does. It tries to find a balance or an equilibrium. It starts to desensitize itself by turning down the volume on its own dopamine receptors. This is called tolerance, and it is the hallmark of addiction. Suddenly, the same amount of gaming that used to give you a rush now just makes you feel normal. To get that same high, you have to play longer, more intensely, or find more stimulating games. Meanwhile, the things in the real world that used to bring you joy, like a good conversation, or a walk outside, or reading a book, they start to feel flat and boring, and your brain's baseline for reward has been artificially jacked up, and reality just can't compete with it. This isn't just temporary either, it's linked to actual physical structural changes in your brain. Neuroimaging studies have found that internet gaming disorder is associated with long term changes in gray matter volume and white matter density. So, the parts of your brain responsible for things like memory, attention, and impulse control can become less efficient. And some research even shows that in people with IGD, which is the gaming disorder, the prefrontal cortex, that's the part of your brain that acts as the CEO, kind of responsible for all the smart decision making, it's associated with reduced gray matter volume, which, while it's not yet proven that gaming directly causes this, the correlation is really strong and mirrors the physical changes seen in the brains of substance addicts. And so think about this for a second. The very part of your brain that should be weighing the consequences and telling you to stop is being weakened in connection to the behavior itself. It creates this terrifying feedback loop. The more you play, the less control you might have over your impulse to play. And as I mentioned earlier, the multi-billion-dollar gaming industry, they know this. Okay, so if this is what's associated with a fully formed adult brain, imagine what's happening to a brain that's still under construction, to someone that's young, a child, a teenager. The adolescent brain is uniquely vulnerable to this process. The key reason is that the prefrontal cortex, which we just talked about, in teenagers, this region is the last part of the brain to fully mature. It doesn't even finish developing until your mid 20s. This means that for a teenager, the CEO of their brain is basically an intern. The impulse control brakes are soft. At the same time, the reward system is highly sensitive. It's literally the perfect storm, a powerful engine of motivation with underdeveloped brakes. Now, on top of that, throw in a super stimulus like a video game into that system. And it's like handing the keys to a Ferrari to a 15-year-old who's only ever driven a golf cart or ridden a bicycle. And so what can happen is a rapid, powerful conditioning process. The brain learns that gaming is the fastest way to feel good, to feel successful, and to escape. And some researchers have found that teens who develop symptoms of gaming addiction may have had pre-existing vulnerabilities, making them more susceptible in the first place. And for those kids, gaming becomes a coping mechanism for underlying issues like depression or social anxiety. Some of the history that you might be exposed to is if you have a family history of addiction, well, right there is a prime example of that. And so this creates a really devastating cycle. A kid feels anxious, so they retreat into a game to escape. The game floods their brain with dopamine, then, that gives them temporary relief. But in doing so, it desensitizes their reward pathways, which can make real life feel even more bleak when they log off the game. This, in turn, can deepen their anxiety and makes them crave the escape of the game even more. They aren't just playing, they're self-medicating. Okay, so this process isn't happening in a lab. It's happening in bedrooms all over the world, and it has real devastating consequences. The global prevalence of gaming disorder is estimated to be around 3% of the general population. But among adolescents, meta-analyses show the rate can be anywhere from about 4% to 10%, depending on the region and the criteria used. A 2024 WHO report noted that 12% of adolescents surveyed in Europe, Central Asia, and Canada are at risk of problematic gaming. We see it in the mental health crisis. Heavy gaming in adolescence is linked to higher rates of depression, anxiety, and attention problems. We see it in the social disconnect. As the virtual world becomes more rewarding than the real world, friendships can wither, family relationships get strained, the player feels isolated, only understood by their online friends, yet that connection is often more shallow and dependent on how well they perform in the game. It's kind of transactional. Now, of course, not all the time, but a lot of the times it can be. We also see it in the failure to launch schoolwork, which requires a lot of focus for delayed reward, can't possibly compete with the instant feedback loop of a game. We see grades plummet. We see kids dropping out of school, like Cam Adair, the founder of Game Quitters. At his worst, he was gaming 16 hours a day, dropped out of high school, and even wrote a suicide note. His story, unfortunately, isn't an anomaly. It's actually the story of thousands of people whose potential is being drained away one level at a time. And in the most tragic extreme cases, we see some people's lives lost. Parents so consumed by gaming that they fatally neglect their children. Young people who take their own lives because the gap between their glorious online self and their real life becomes too painful to handle. And so this is the truth that nobody wants to admit. For a significant number of people, it's not even just a hobby. It's a behavioral addiction with consequences as real and tragic as any other disorder. Okay, so what's the answer? Well, demonize technology and ban all video games? Of course not. We're not going to do that. It's probably not healthy either. But for many people, gaming is fun. It's a balanced part of their lives, and you don't necessarily become addicted to it. It's not always going to happen that way. you aren't going to become addicted to everything that you play. As someone that plays games myself, I have tried to strike a healthy balance between playing video games, spending time with family, getting outdoors, and doing these other things. Okay, so you have to strike the balance. And I think the overall answer starts with being honest about the science. It starts with dropping the defensive line that, well, it's just a game. We have to admit that we've created something that, for some brains, is just too powerful to handle. It's kind of the same thing with smartphones. And so, if you are a parent, this means you got to be engaged. I'm a parent myself, and I have tried to be really engaged and really intentional with my son, being very cautious around this, especially at a young age. It also means understanding what's happening in your child's brain. Look for the warning signs: slipping grades, pulling away from friends and family, irritability when they can't play, losing interest in everything else. Help them build a life outside the game that is genuinely rewarding. The other piece I want to mention here is that just because all of those things are happening doesn't necessarily mean it is tied explicitly to gaming. There could be other things going on. There could be other traumas. There could be other mental health illness. So this is just one example in one area. So I wanted to make sure I mention that and be mindful of that. Okay, so if you're a gamer like myself, this was something, it's kind of hard to talk about, but if you're a gamer and this makes you feel a little uncomfortable, you kind of have to ask yourself why. Does nothing else seem to make you feel as good as gaming? Do you lie about how many hours you play? Have your relationships or your goals suffered because of it? Being honest with yourself is the first and the hardest step. Gaming addiction isn't a moral failing or a weakness of character. It's a predictable neurobiological response to an unprecedented level of stimulation. But the good news is the brain is plastic. The neuroplasticity in the brain it's phenomenal, and it can be rewired. Change is possible, but it starts with education and honesty. It starts with having the conversation we've been avoiding. So if this sounds like you or someone you love, share your story in the comments. I would love to hear it. You're not alone in this. And let's actually talk about this honestly and without stigma. Like I said, I am a gamer myself and love video games. I create gaming content. I've always played video games. And as I've gotten older, I've started to learn to find the striking balance, especially after having a son and getting married and all those things. Now, I will continue to play games and I still love them, but I would genuinely like to know what stories you might have, what struggles you might have. Feel free even to share how gaming may have helped you in a positive way. Gaming is not all bad. Clearly, it's not. It does a lot of good, but we do have to talk about the uncomfortable truths that could stem from gaming. So let me know in the comments, and I really appreciate you listening and watching this video.